Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel, and welcome back to another strategy roundtable where we aim to help you in this final few weeks of your SuperCoach, AFL Fantasy and Dream Team season. A big apologies from me. It's been a tough week. I've been away, but we're back and still here straight after teams have dropped, wanting to help you with the decisions you have to make. We want to talk about the players that are in and out. We've got to talk about fixtures. We've got to talk about keeping your cool and also knowing when to hit the eject button on your players. These are just some of the things coming up on this week's strategy roundtable. And joining me on this podcast is fellow Coaches panelist, MiniMonk. Hello, mate. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a while since we've had one of these one-on-one D&M sessions. Go about it. Just, you and me, back and forth. Me and the hair.
Oh, the bromance is back. That's exactly what's going on. That's for sure. Hey, mate, we probably should do it right at the top of this episode. I alluded to it before. This is being recorded after Thursday night teams are out. So we know the teams Friday through to Saturday. There's a few outs of Sunday teams, but still yet, as we have every single week, waiting till 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to be able to have that land. I suppose the advantage of us doing a Thursday post-teams episode, MiniMonk, is we don't have to speculate about a couple of, do they make it? Do they not? There are some pretty handy names that coaches either in SuperCoach or Dream Team lacking in trades. I'm alluding to a Colby McKercher type who's come back into the team is helpful. And for those of us in AFL Fantasy, again, looking to capitalize on certain matchups or looking for a green dot at 200,000 that we're trying to get off a player like a Clay Hall, who we knew about earlier in the week and we'll know Friday night about whether or not he's free of a sub, for example. But what do the teams tell you? Is there any standout names that means this is good news for us? Or are there any players that it might be potentially a little bit of a warning sign in your eyes, potentially for a player's role or scoring options?
Well, I think the big ones in terms of players that have returned back into their teams are Matt Crouch for the Crows, whether you love him or you hate him. I think that's going to see a significant impact on the ability of the other Crows midfielders to be able to score. We've got Toby Nankervis back in. So, he's still a relatively friendly matchup for Tristan Sherry to go against this weekend, but it's good for the owners that have had him for his 1 week concussion and back into the team. As you said, McKerch is back. And another interesting one is Mattaes Phillipou is back for the Saints. Now, he does play towards the end of Sunday, so he's the last game of the round, but he's a very interesting option, and I know there's a few SuperCoach and Dream Teamers that would probably have him and be very thankful that he's back this week. With the notable outs probably being that Fisher is still missing and that he's got plantar fasciitis, which is not good if you've been holding him and if you still have a trade in your back pocket. I suspect now is probably the time to burn it on him and just go to whoever you can get. Maybe it is a Fisher to a Phillipou. And the other big one is Jordan Ridley. We thought it was just a corky. Turns out it's a hip flexor issue, and it might be a couple of weeks. So there might be some flow-on effects from that.
It does feel like those are the big trades that we're making now. Outside of in a moment, I do want to talk about fixture fades and fixture trades that we should be looking to go into as we partially look at the analysis of fixtures and forms, but also the players that have come in, you mentioned. But a Phillipou feels like a ripping pick. We've spent the better part of the past almost month now, but certainly the last 2 weeks here at the Coaches Panel, banging the jungle drum pretty loudly about, hey, it's not really worth trading your F6 right now. If you're going to spend anything in your forward line, it's building depth, getting a seventh forward option, and then that could have been a Dowling or Manor, and it would have worked perfectly fine. Do you put a Phillipou in that same place for you now? Again, not everybody's in that luxurious position. They might have a Fisher, though, to be able to make that move. Where do you place that Phillipou thing? Because his 2 weeks pre-injury looked awesome, but do you have any inclinations or estimations about whether or not you see Phillipou going straight back into that role, or does the recent injury break change any of your thought process around how Mattaes could be an option for us at F6 into F7 rotation?
We don't like to speculate on team sheets and what they actually spell and where they put players because, they put them anywhere on any given day. I know Chris Scott's an absolute fiend for putting, Mitch Duncan at ruck, Tom Hawkins at fullback. You can just see it. But when Phillipou did that move into the midfield, the 2 weeks where he moved into that role, he was named to follow beside Jack Steele. And what do you know? His first game back from his injury, he's named to follow beside Jack Steele.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they've found something. I think that they've found that he can play that role. They want to see what he can do for the rest of the season. And, it might ruin his price for next year. People might still think about picking him. But at his price tag, it's worth the punt. Like, he's $260K in SuperCoach.
Yeah.
He's under $500K in AFL Fantasy. Like, you can trade like a Logan Evans, a Sean Manor, a Billy Dowling, a Humphreys, all of these rookies that have been sitting in our teams for 5 or 6 weeks. And you can say, you know what? Stuff it. I'll grab him as an extra premium, or quote-unquote premium. I'll grab him as a potential scorer for the last few weeks. Give me some cover that's actually good. Maybe he pops a big score that I can loop on. Maybe there's someone else that I've got that's got a bad matchup on a particular week, and I want to dodge it. And if we look at the fixtures, a couple of those really popular F5, F6 type options do have some pretty rough matchups in the last couple of rounds. If we look at next week, we've got Hawthorn versus Carlton. Do you really want to play Dylan Moore in that matchup? I think I'd try and loop him off if I can. And what do you know? The next game after that, Phillipou plays, and it's against Richmond.
Ooh.
The week after, we've got North Melbourne against the Dogs, one of the most restrictive inside midfielder matchups in the competition. And the game before that, on the Saturday night, we've got Phillipou against Geelong, a very nice matchup for inside midfielders. So if you're moving, you probably have to move this week because of the break even that he's got across the formats. It's not the ideal week to move on to him because he does play against Brisbane, which is not an easy matchup for inside midfielders, although it has been a little bit better in the last couple of weeks. But you're moving this week so that you can reap the rewards in the 2 weeks after that.
Does the moves you want to make, and I do want to talk about some players' fixtures that you can trade into or trade out of in a moment, but we're in league finals now for most customary normative approach of how people would approach their leagues. Of course, there's different customizations. Some could be a week ahead and it's already there. Others, maybe it's a smaller league, different setup, yada, yada, yada. But does it change any of your mentality about how you approach looping options often on your team, or how aggressive you might go in a VC option earlier in the week? Does that change mentality if you in a league mindset? We know what ranking, it's a bit more stay with the curve in certain spaces, protect, and then know when to get aggressive. But in a league's focus, does that ever change? Because you can see a little bit what your opponent's doing. AFL Fantasy, it's a little bit harder sometimes to see it week to week, but SuperCoach and Dream Team, you can see it a little bit more real time. What's your take on that?
Oh, I think it definitely does. If you're playing for leagues, you've got to know where your differences are going into the week, and knowing that the opposition coach either has a low number of trades left and who they might be looking to trade out and say Dream Team and SuperCoach, or that they've got 2 trades and knowing where they might try and match you or try and draw separation away from you. And if you've got, let's say it's about 6 unique scorers. I think that's a pretty common number at this time of the year. We've got fairly similar teams with our forwards. Most teams are going to have Heaney, Flanders, Zorko, maybe a Caldwell, Moore, Simpkin types, down back.
There's one or 2 tops, most forward lines.
Exactly. One or 2 in the forward line, a couple in the back line, a couple in the mids, and maybe a ruck. So let's say it's about 6. Yep. If you think that your 6 have got better matchups and have got a better players than what your opponent has, you can afford to be a little bit less aggressive. You can afford to say, okay, my VC's got 120. I'm just going to take it. But if you're in a position where you need to take a risk, you need to try and maximize the potential gain, you might say, 120? No, I've got a captain. I think I can go 140, 150. I've got, I put Jai Simpkin onto my bench for his matchup and he's only gone 60 this week. I need to put someone else on. I need to get a better score into my F6 spot. that's when you can start to be more aggressive with these sorts of moves. So absolutely, it does factor into the decisions that you make.
It's an interesting one. Like, we've got 2 Friday night matchups this week. We've had that happen before, but it does provide us a couple of additional looks at the VC for us, which is handy, which maybe we could look at the player trade and fade spaces for us here. Does that change the 2 Friday night matchups? Does that change the approach to you again this week? Or is it like, yeah, I'm definitely taking a Friday night VC? There is a pretty favourable matchup that's there that probably lends itself to it anyway. But does the double Friday, before we look at players specifically, does it change what you would or wouldn't do normally?
Not really. It's the same as almost having a Thursday night game and a Friday night game. You know, if a team's got a good matchup in one of those games, you look to target a player from them. If they don't, you go to the Saturday morning or the Saturday night or the Sunday first game if you've got a loophole. And that's the biggest thing that you've always got to look for. Is like, what are the favorable matchups and where are the players that I've got that I can actually loop a score with? Because quite a lot of teams either have like a Livingston or who's the other one? I can't remember.
Heath.
The other West Coast Rock or Heath.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
if you've got a Livingston at R3, you can't loop with him this week. Because he plays the second game on the Friday. Like you try and go for a Bontempelli into a Harry Shizu, and Bontempelli suddenly goes 140, and you don't have that red dot to take him because your R3 is locked in already. That's bad luck. But you've got to look at those sorts of things early and know where your loophole options are, and then work backwards from that. And you go, this is the point I have to make my decision as to whether I'm taking a VC or not. Now I need to decide who is the VC that's the best option for me at this point.
We talked on the episodes, both the AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach strategy roundtables last week, about some teams that have some challenging fixtures coming up for us, specifically the port pair of Rosie and Butters. We saw Butters get tagged really well in the first half, and then bizarrely, they move off that tag after half time from Chigcotter on him. And yet it's probably, you could say, one of the reasons why Port Adelaide end up winning this game is this bizarre tactical change. And there were those two. And then Tom Green was probably the other, from an inside midfield perspective, that these three were all value picks for us at varying times this year based on a bunch of different outcomes that got them at a cheap price point. Are you still quite bullish on those three being the ones, if you haven't got out of them in AFL Fantasy, to prioritise? While SuperCoach, again, it's limited to what your options are, trades remaining, and those components. But are those still the three inside mids from a future forecast of fixtures that you're like, oh, those would be the three if I could get off, I would get off?
It's not quite as bad now for Rosie and Butters. The matchup this week isn't great. Sydney's probably the hardest inside midfield matchup going around, besides maybe, Port Adelaide themselves and Hawthorn. And the week after, they've got Melbourne, who look a shell of themselves at the moment.
Yeah.
Adelaide and Fremantle finish the season isn't the easiest, isn't the hardest. You got the showdown, and Free have been pretty strong through the midfield, especially through clearance recently. So I'm not as saying that those two need to be traded out. You've probably missed the really bad part of it. But man, if you've still got Tom Green, I would be jumping off.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Like, his next 4 is just, it's not good. It's Hawthorn, then Brisbane, then Fremantle, then the Dogs. Like, you go to DFS, you sort by the ranking for like where they have it, and it's like -2 Collingwood, -3 Adelaide, -4 for GWS.
Yeah, it's not good. So where do you place? Because it's this interesting spot. Like, this is the time of season where there's not a whole heap of stuff for people to talk about. Like, they're not looking at team values. They're not looking at break evens. They're not looking at a upgrade cadence that we might have talked about over the first 2/3 of the season. And so Now, across the content community that talks about AFL Fantasy SuperCoach Dream Team, all of a sudden we might even overplay to some degree what a fixture looks like for someone. Where do we sit in this interesting balance of valuing fixtures versus knowing what a player's potential outcome or output could be? Because Green, against anyone, can get 35 possessions and pot it out of 110 with not ease, but within the world of probability. So how do you help coaches balance those two things out with their potential outcomes of what they could score, knowing on history and ability, versus everything about the fixture screams get off of this? I know we talked a little bit about this about Sarong with the upside, but let's talk about the reverse of that, where the fixture's bad, but the player hasn't been really bad at all when he's not been injured. How do we value those two things correctly and not overvalue one thing?
Well, it's exactly the word that you used earlier on. It's probability. We're playing the odds at this point. We're trying to stack the deck into our favor as much as we can. We can say, Tom Green, if you gave him against the average opponent, he would score 110. But his next four opponents are all negative. So that average might not be 110. It might just be 100. So if you trade him out to someone who's going to average 110 over the next 4 weeks, you've gained 10 points per week. That's 40 points. Your expected gain has increased. One of those games, he might still go 125, 130 in, but you're playing the odds. You're trying to stack the deck in your favor as much as you can. And you can say, I can find someone else who's as good as him and has got much better fixtures than what he has.
So one of those teams...
the tricky part...
No, you go.
Sorry, I think and this is the reason why when it comes to this luxury trade season, especially in AFL Fantasy, where we actually look to trade the players the most is in the midfield. And that's because it's much easier to move from someone who's averaging 110 to another player who's averaging 110.
Correct.
You don't want to be jumping off any of Heaney, Caldwell, Sheasel, Dacos, Flanders, Zorko,
Whitfield,
any of these types of players. You're just not jumping off it because you're saying even if they're down 10 points per game on what they've done for the season so far, they're still better than almost any other option that I can trade into. Whereas in the midfield, you still have that flexibility, and that's why it's where most people look to pull those, what we call luxury trades at the end of the season.
And does it mean like on the almost the inverse of that, we look at teams and players that have roaring fixtures for us that becomes really interesting? Like politely, if you're a Flanders owner and he's not your VC on Friday night, I'm really intrigued to know why you're not going there, given like SuperCoach hasn't failed to go under 100 all year. On paper, favourable matchup against West Coast. Like everything's screaming Flanders could go 125 relative ease across the formats. Anderson probably sits in that. We talked about him last week across the podcasts, or both podcast episodes, about how good this inside and midfield run is for the Gold Coast Suns. So outside of those two, like maybe before we talk about outside of those two, are those just the two that if you've got them in your side, which most people do own Flanders, you're just like, yes, that's my VC option? Or does he lack some ceiling that you want to see in this midfield role?
Ceiling potentially.
Sure.
There's an argument to be made that you can go for Bontempelli instead, especially in SuperCoach where it's his format of choice. Like his scoring in SuperCoach is crazy.
Yeah.
But I think that Flanders is definitely someone who has enough ceiling to be justifiable as a captaincy option. And realistically in AFL Fantasy, you're looking for something that's over 120. Like if you've got a 120 VC, you're taking that. And he's gone over 120, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times this year in 18 games. One in every 4. And those spike games have come in matchups where you would expect it. I think that's pretty good. Earlier in the year, went 112 against West Coast. I'd say it's probably enough to worth considering. I think if you've got Noah Anderson, though, like he's someone who absolutely has a ceiling. Like he has a 180 AF game in him as well.
Yeah.
Both of those are great vice captaincy options this week.
Yeah.
But you could make an argument that maybe I want to target, Harry Sheasel or Tristan Cherry in the Saturday early game because both of those, just last week, showed their
Went
ceilings.
huge.
I mean, 160 SC, 150 SC.
You know when you reach that age where everyone and their mother won't shut up about their credit scores, yet it seems like no one really understands what's so special about those 3 random numbers? That's because credit scores are meaningless, unless you have Credit Karma to show you how to use them. We use those 3 random numbers, plus your financial profile, to help you find your next opportunity. Like a more rewarding credit card, a game plan that helps you pay down debt faster, or a personal loan to help you save more on interest payments each month. Cha-ching! Download Intuit Credit Karma today to get started.
140 odds, 150 odds AF as well. Like,
Yeah.
that's an easy matchup. You could be just concerned about the tag from Graham onto Sheasel this week, but like, that's what a VC is for. You're targeting a ceiling score. If the tag doesn't go there, it could easily come.
Yeah. Then, are there any other players? Because I want to talk before we wrap up the episode. It's a shorter episode because, well, one, you're listening to this very late on a Thursday or on a Friday, so you don't have the hours to ponder the nuance variables that you might consider. But before I look at just one last thing to just help us keep our head a little bit before we might be getting a little overly reactive, is there any other players that we want to trade into now? Because even in AFL Fantasy, for most of the moves now, SuperCoach and Dream Team, it's more normative and narrative for us now, which is the players you're bringing in now, you've got to be pretty content to have them in your team for the rest of the year. Definitely in SuperCoach and Dream Team, you know that, but AFL Fantasy, that's also the mindset you've got to have, so you're not getting stuck with this is for a week and then I'm doing this in 1 week and then I'm doing this. Just ask Jordan Ridley owners. You think you're getting an amazing fixture, luck goes against you. That happens. It's nothing you did wrong. It's just the variable of luck that comes into the game. But is there any other teams or specific lines that you just go, oh, listeners of the panel, do not miss this? So we've talked about the Suns inside mids. We're not talking about Rao. We don't want to do that to ourselves. Who are the other potentials that you could just quickly flag for us that says, if you could get on this for the 4 weeks, the probabilities of what history says is looking favourable for you? Is there any more that sit there for you?
Tristan Cherry.
Yeah.
Best last 4 weeks for Ruckman in going around. Like, to me, like, he's been arguably
pick of the season. Pick of the season. Yeah.
Like, it just almost has to be, especially with how he's performed. I don't mind a Kazai Pickett after this week.
Yeah.
Melbourne's fixtures after, it's not too bad. It could be an interesting play, especially with the fact that Oliver's still out, and they just got to try something. They've got to try and get some spark into that midfield to see if they can get anything going. There's been a lot of love for Adam Treloar this week, and I understand it. He's got a very hot hand at the moment, but you're paying pretty high price for him. It doesn't matter as much at this point of the year. But if you're going to pay that high of a price, you've got to be sure that you're going to be holding him and probably trying to captain him in one of the next 4 fixtures.
Yeah,
and you could probably look for him as a VC this week against Melbourne. Yes. There's a potential ceiling there. But I'm not sure I'd trust him in any of the other games. And it is worth noting that last game of the year is in Ballarat. It is at Mars Stadium. And
Giants, I think, isn't it? Yeah. No.
It is indeed. Weird things happen on Mars. Weird things happen on Mars. And the other one that's been getting a lot of love, although it doesn't actually reflect as much in the trade-in stats this week from what I've seen, is Nick Newman.
Yeah, talk to me about that. Because, again, not everyone needs a D6, but what's your take on that? Because we say he's got an amazing fixture, but I don't know if amazing is the word I'd use. It's fine, but it's not amazing Noah Anderson, Sam Flanders type where everything is awesome kind of look.
Exactly. It's not to the same level as that. It is a good fixture. It's Collingwood, Hawthorn, West Coast, St Kilda. It's positive.
Hawthorn's a bit tough though.
Hawthorn is a bit tough. It's the easiest run for designated kickers on the run home.
Yes. And
the other teams that really have a good run, you're not really looking to go anyone from them. Like Brisbane, I don't think people are going to be trading into Wilmot. People have probably already got Zorko. Melbourne, you would probably looking at Trent Rivers, but he's moved into the midfield now, so it doesn't apply anymore. Gold Coast, most people would have Flanders. You could maybe look at a Will Powell if you were considering going there.
If you're going for something crazy, yeah.
Yeah, and then Geelong, Stewart, Duncan's even out this week, so you can't even go there. So he's got the easiest run of that class. But I was actually just trying to get it up because I don't know it off the top of my head. But I believe he's not getting that bulk of the kick-ins that you really do want to see from those types of players that are the designated kickers. Yeah. Because when they get the kick-ins like that, it just gives them that extra 15 points. And looking at it, last week, Mitch McGovern, 7 out of 7 played on. Nick Newman, 2.
Yeah.
Right? There's 12 in the game, and he's not even getting 20%.
50%. Yeah, not even that.
It's a bit scary because of that. He does have a ceiling, and he showed that at the back end of last year. But I'm just worried about like who are you trading out to go to him? Like if you've got a Ridley, fair enough. Absolutely
different story.
Do it. That's
different
a way
story.
to go.
Yeah.
But like if you've got a Nick Dacos, a Whitfield, a Sheasel, even a young
Houston,
Clark, maybe
all
Ryan,
these guys. Yeah.
Ryan, I'd maybe look at trading because
AFL Fantasy only, probably though. I don't know if I do it in SuperCoach.
Probably not in SuperCoach.
Yeah, agreed there. But I think you just have to be really careful about who you're trading out. Like that is just as important this time of the year. You know, we talk so much about, this player has a great run to finish the year. What about the teams that have a really bad run? Like what about if we look at the designated kickers? St Kilda, their last 4, Brisbane, Richmond, Geelong, Carlton. Like if you've got Nazire or Sinclair, look to jump off. Like that's someone that you could do it from. Yeah, like that's the positions where you got to look for it. It's as much about who is going out as who is coming in.
Yeah, it's a good shout. So before we wrap up the episode then, let's try to help coaches keep a little bit of perspective, because as we are into this now final month of the year, we do still see stinky scores roll through, and we're very reactive at this time of year. We get one bad score in round 6 or 7 from a premium type performer. We're like, it's not ideal to get the 60 now. But he got tagged. He had a bad day. The roll shuffled a little bit. Oh, well, bring on the next round. Whereas now, we are just mercenaries with underperforming players in a 1-week isolated incident. It's like, that's it. You get out of my team. End of season trip. I'll forget I've ever done any selection with you. I will banish you from memory. We are going to just get you out of this team, however you'd like to say it. Can you help me help coaches know the difference between that being the appropriate response as opposed to holding a little bit of perspective to know, well, it was to be expected, or, well, no, this is just an isolated incident. You move on. How do you know the difference between when you get something stinky that you know to push through and keep the faith, as opposed to it's the eject button for you on my team, my friend?
It's not easy. It's definitely not easy to be able to draw the distinction between the two. But what you've got to look at is you've got to think about why you had them in your team in the first place. Like if you've traded into someone and then they've drawn a stinky score, that's going to hurt a lot more than if you've held them for 16 weeks rather, not 16 years.
I was about to say, you're describing some of the players in my keeper team, mate. So I'm holding on.
I've seen your keeper team. You haven't had anyone in there for 16 years.
They might be about 16 years old.
You know, it's like let's use Bontempelli as an example. He had Sydney last week. Scored an 81 in AFL Fantasy.
Terrible matchup.
Low ton, I think, in SuperCoach.
Terrible matchup. Sydney at the SCG is an absolutely awful matchup for inside midfielders. But he's got Melbourne this week.
Great matchup.
And he's back on deck at Marvel Stadium. Are you going to trade out of Bontempelli this week? Absolutely not. If anything, people are looking to probably trade into him.
Neil Bullen's, yes, he's done negating tagging roles, but if Neil Bullen goes to Bontempelli, he's loving that matchup if that comes at his way in terms of what it does for him and the rest of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the context behind scores. It's just like, we talk about tags and we talk about tag risks as well. And yes, there's tags risk for Bontempelli. There's a tag risk for Harry Sheasel. But sometimes you just got to back in a player in form, or you got to back in the skill of a player. Like Bontempelli is 28. He's a big bulk of a man. he's been working through tags for 5 years now. And we've seen him still be able to go 150, 160, even when being tagged, even when being sick and coming off an injury. Like, you've just got to back him in at some point.
Yeah.
Sheasel, you got no reason to doubt him because he's just been like the premier fantasy scorer. Like, I mean, he's second year in the system, for God's sake. And he's already pumping out a 105, 110 average and moving into the midfield and pumping 160 Supercoach scores. Like, at some point, you've just got to back in the player.
Yeah.
And when they pop a bad score, sometimes you've just got to back them in and they'll have a bounce back. Like, I know that Pig talks about it with regards to captains, that captains will bounce back after their team's been absolutely scorched in the media. Someone like a Zach Merritt, a Max Gawn, where, you know, Melbourne and Essendon are probably the two teams that are getting absolutely monstered in the Victorian media at the moment. If you're looking for bounce back games, those are probably two where you could see it.
Yeah, even a Sam Walsh to some extent, given how hard Carlton's gone that. That's really, really helpful, mate. As always, you kind of talk us off the ledge on some decisions and moves that we really want to make but shouldn't, and other times you put us on notice on some players and some decisions that we should be considering and moving. So, MiniMonk, as always, a pleasure to talk SuperCoach, AFL Fantasy and Dream Team with you, my friend.
Good to be back and good to be chatting about all of them again.
If you haven't followed the Coaches Panel across audio podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your audio podcasts from, make sure you follow, rate, and you can subscribe and leave a review while you're there. If you're watching this on YouTube, hi, nice to see you. Comment below and let us know what the trades you're planning on making this week. We would love to know about them. And our Patreons, we love you. You've done an incredible amount of work and getting some bonus content through the season proper. Make sure you hang with us in the off-season because the keeper ranks drop for you as well as our trade reviews. They all come through as we start to head towards the off-season while also still giving you all the up-to-date content in these final 4 weeks. Hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We hope for you this week, your early week VC pops an absolute monster. We hope the players you trade into deliver exactly the outcomes you're expecting, and those you are off, either through injuries, frustration, or fixtures. Absolutely, you do not get burnt by. From all of us here at the Coaches Panel, we wish you good luck, and we can't wait to be chatting with you again about fantasy footy real soon.